wrestle them free from that grasp of, even if this is still in public schools, they're going to be getting good, solid foundational gospel education through LifeWise or through the ability to go to a school and a church in their community. And I think it's just really exciting for the next generation here in Ohio. Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome back to the first episode of The Narrative in 2025. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan with you. And guys, I'm curious, now that we're into the new year, maybe planning some travels and stuff like that already, where are you heading first? The Gulf of America, Mount McKinley, to 51st state, Canada? Where are we going in 2025?
Or Greenland.
Fellas?
Greenland.
Exactly.
Do you hear John Fetterman is going to go ask Trump if he could be Pope of Greenland? I thought that was.
Oh, it's going to be fun in a couple of weeks when Trump gets back into office. But I just saw some of that flying around this week, and I thought it was just so brilliant.
I want to take over the Panama Canal. That's what I want. That's
yeah, I forgot about that one too. So
go old school, right? Let's get back to some good old fashioned colonialism. We're missing that around here. So
we are
great fishing in the Panama Canal. Get down there and do some fishing.
That's where you go. That's like they're talking about restoring America and the world. And David's like, oh, you can fish there.
David's like, where can I go and kill something?
Yeah. I'll be down there on a blacked out Trump America hat.
There you go. Yeah. That'll make you real popular down there, I'm sure, David.
Without question. Well, we're going to take a little different approach today for our first episode of the year. We want to do just sort of a general outlook on 2025, some stuff that's on all of our individual radars, and just talk about things that are coming up here in the new year and help set the table for the things we'll be doing at CCV and what we'll be talking about on the narrative, I'm sure, from time to time. So we're going to dive right into it. And Aaron, since you're at the top of the pecking order at CCV, we're going to give you the president's honor of going first with one of the things that you've got on your radar that you're watching out for in 2025.
Yeah, I think, and it's especially, poignant because, as we're recording this right now, Ohio only has one senator. It is official as of last night that J.D. Vance resigned from the U.S. Senate. So we'll be getting a new senator here sometime. I think Governor DeWine said in an interview yesterday that he'll announce it next week. I think a lot of the feel around, just as an aside, I think a lot of the feel around Capitol Square is that Lieutenant Governor John Husted is probably the inside pick to be the selection, and so there's gonna be a lot of ripple effects from that. But I think to that sort of broader point, I think the thing I'm most watching in 2025, especially in these first few months, is can the Trump administration truly destroy and truly reform, however you want to look at it, the administrative state at the federal government level, truly make all of these massive changes. And again, this is far more than regulations, right? This is talking about the problems in the FBI, the problems in the CIA. I know we're going to do an episode here soon on sort of the truth about what happened on January 6th and all of those types of things, and what the FBI did in those cases that are still bad. Like there's so many things in the federal government that are massive that need reformed. That even look at it. RFK coming into Health and Human Services, that massive opportunity to change the course of the federal government. This feels like a potential historic moment. Will we be able to deliver on those things? I'm sure we'll talk about this on the podcast as this all plays out. Will they be able to get this through Congress? Right? There's a whole that's already we're already getting into some of those debates, but then. In many ways, just as important is can that vibe shift that we're talking about happening in Washington, D.C., that I feel like we have a better opportunity to actually achieve than ever before. Does that actually trickle down to Ohio, right? In many ways, we by all means, we still have the DeWine administration in there, which, we very much can work with the DeWine administration. They just signed House Bill 8, but they're very we still have a massive state government here. At the same time, we have more conservative leadership in the General Assembly than we've ever had, right? I mean, this can't go unnoticed, right? Having Matt Huffman as Speaker of the House and Rob McCauley as Senate President, this is in Ohio history the most conservative leadership we've ever had. So, and Ohio has just as much of a deep state as the feds do, right? Maybe not in the same way with law enforcement, but certainly in terms of regulatory agencies, all those types of things. So does that same vibe that you're seeing in Washington, the momentum you're seeing there, does that come down to Ohio? That's one of the big things I'm watching in the new year.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm watching, and this goes along with Trump coming into office, and I want to say at the outset, I am not an economic expert at all, but I'm interested to see what kind of policies that Donald Trump actually does bring on the economic front, because this might be the only time we quote James Carville on the podcast. But certainly, I think one of the reasons beyond the administrative state dismantling that Trump got elected was the economy, and people are feeling that pinch at the grocery store and in their checkbooks. And what is he going to do to actually bring some of those grocery prices back under control? As somebody who's got 6 younger mouths to feed,
Yeah.
I'm very interested in that. But does he go the tariff route? Does that actually come to play? And what kind of impact does that have on the American economy? I'm pretty much a noob on all that, to be honest with you. It's not something
Will
that's
his administration encourage CEOs to give all their employers raises?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the question that I have.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that it's not going to be solved by just 1 or 2 things that he can do. But it was such a linchpin of this past election. So how does that play out practically, and does that actually benefit the majority of Americans when it comes to keeping money in their paychecks and in their bank accounts?
Well, and this is something, Mike, that we talked about wanting, I know we're talking about trying to get someone on the podcast to talk about what's going on in Canada right now with Justin Trudeau resigning, the prime minister there. But this whole conversation around inflation is a national one, right?
Yeah.
Where we still are, we're starting now to again begin the long tail of the consequences of some bad decisions made during COVID, inflation being one of them, the education side being one of them. And again, like, I think the reason why you see such radical things happening, like Justin Trudeau resigning, like it is in many ways, the 2024 election of Donald Trump is more jarring than the 2016 election of Donald Trump, because, in many ways, the 16 election was a pure and simple sort of pendulum swing away. Barack Obama had been president for 8 years. It's sort of natural that the other party wins in that time. And Hillary Clinton was a very unpopular candidate. President Trump this time ran on a much clearer agenda of reform, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, sort of the economic side of it is very important about it. And he won bigger than he did before, right? Everyone who says that President Trump is so unpopular neglects the reality that when he ran in 16 and 20 and 24, he's gotten more votes each time. And that's a sign of somebody who's growing more popular, not less. And this time he came in with such massive reform ideas. I think if anybody's ever had a mandate, it'd be him.
All right, David Mahan, you are up, sir. What is the first thing that you are watching in 2025?
Well, I've got one local level, one state level, one federal level, and I'm gonna go ahead and start with my state, because I think, Aaron, you touched on the fact of the state house briefly, and all eyes on the state house. Will we see what a supermajority looks like in the state of Ohio? We had last General Assembly, the 135th was all about the riff in the House, and that affected the communication and the amount of work that the Senate wanted to do with the House. I was hearing terms like it's a zoo over there, it's a hot mess over there, so the Senate didn't want to work with them. Don't send trash over here. If you guys can't get your act together, don't ask us to clean it up. And I mean, I'm hearing all of that all of the last couple of years. But now, as I'm talking to to the members both in the House and the Senate, it's a completely different vibe over there. I mean, they are encouraged, they are excited, they want to work together. I don't know if I've ever heard of them talk more about having concurrent bills in the House and the Senate working at the same time, and who should we partner with over there. And I mean, it's amazing. I know there's some fears, and I think we heard a little bit of fears about Emperor Huffman, in the state of Ohio, the all-powerful Oz. But that could be a good thing, and it could, I guess, potentially be a not so good thing, depending on how he goes with it. Will there be conservative, will the red meat conservative bills, will they get the attention that they deserve? But I'm encouraged, and I'm excited to hear everybody's feedback. And from what I understand, there's already 200 and some bills over there at LSC that they are trying to get all nailed down. So the members are working hard already, and just wasn't like that this time last year.
Yeah. And LSC is the Legislative Service Commission. That's the internal body that drafts bills at the State House for the members. The members come up with an idea, and then they actually draft it. It's so funny to me, especially hearing about the concerns with Speaker Huffman. I think that for a lot of folks, and this is one of these things that a lot of times we'll opine about how bad things are for conservatives, or I wish that we like to our natural state of conservatives is to kind of curse the wind, but the reality is, for those of us who have been around a while, like, Huffman was one of the conservative champions, right? He was one of the conservative outsiders, right? That sort of built his way up and built coalitions. And so, yeah, I mean, by all means, somebody being speaker for 8 years, we've never had, right? And I think for a lot of folks, one of the whenever somebody is in the most powerful position for 8 years, I understand why folks would have concern about that. But when you practically look at, we keep saying around here, 2020, the 2023-2024 General Assembly was CCV's most successful legislative session ever, right? You look at everything from SAFE Act to Save Women's Sports to the bathroom bill to backpack to the Parents' Bill of Rights to LifeWise. I mean, we did all of that. That all got done at a time when you had a democratically elected Speaker of the House, right? And Mike DeWine is governor, right? How in the world does that happen, right? And that happens in large part because you had maybe the most strategic Senate president, conservative Senate president we've ever had, in Matt Huffman, right? And that's so for the concerns. And again, there's a handful of good friends of CCV's, lawmakers that had concerns about Huffman when the speaker vote came up. It's like, guys, have some perspective right now. All of these massive sort of culture shifting bills got done because we had a Senate president that knew how to navigate unprecedented waters, right?
My concern is that when you don't have a boogeyman to galvanize everybody and to get everybody on the same page, then we tend to fight each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my concern with the 136.
Well, Aaron, we're going to let you go ahead and give us your number 2 thing that you're watching for in 2025.
I think this kind of gets back to that sort of vibes conversation. But when you look back at these last kind of 10 years in our country and in our state, you see a real rejection of sort of the left's bully politics. Maybe you call it cancel culture. Mm-hmm. I think the clearest example of this, and we've talked about this on the podcast a lot, is like the trans LGBT issues, right? Flash back 10 years ago and talking about LGBT stuff, right, especially right after, before and after the Obergefell gay marriage decision, like in conservative Republican spaces, especially, it was like, don't talk about those things. This is a losing issue, all of that kind of stuff. The media is going to come at you. They're going to destroy you when you start talking about these things. Well, genuinely, like, again, we've $230 million were spent in this last Senate election attacking leftist politicians for their position on these issues, right? We overrode a governor's veto on these issues. And basically, it was that you have conservative politicians saying, and leaders and others saying, we don't care if you try to cancel us. You really can't cancel us, right? And I see that same sort of this sort of rejection of cancel culture, rejection of bully politics. There's a lot of other areas that this impacts. I think the biggest one I'm watching in particular is on immigration, right? And immigration, especially tied to the way the left has silenced honest conversation about immigration by using racism as a cudgel, right? I sent this around to the team. Barry Weiss on their podcast, honestly, just did and we might be talking about this on the narrative here. Just did a real long expose on what's happening in the UK with their massive influx of primarily Islamic immigrants coming in that have led to these massive grooming gangs, right? Of just UK children being literally raped, thousands upon thousands, right? And it being allowed to happen because people didn't want to be called racist, right? They didn't want to call out that issue because they didn't want to be called racist. And it's, that's basically how Biden got away with allowing 12 million illegal immigrants coming into our country, because to say anything about, hey, this isn't a good idea for a wide variety of reasons, people were sort of bullied into silence by being called racist. Well, obviously that was rejected in the 2024 elections. I'm hoping that this conversation is a bigger conversation than one that just happens in politics. I hope it's a conversation that happens within the church, right? That this starts a conversation in churches, one, both on what is a biblical view of any issue, right? That the first question isn't, I think, and Mike, you and I have talked about this, David, you and I have talked about this a little bit as well. Somehow we got ourselves trapped into this conversation of saying, hey, what is this position going to do to our witness, right? That became the fundamental, most important question for Christians. And I'm not saying it's not an important question. What I am saying is that it's not the most important question. And when we let that become the most important question, as opposed to what is true, what is God calling us to, how does God view this? What does God's word tell us about this? That's the more important question. That question of what does this do to our witness really pressed a lot of churches and a lot of Christians into positions and cultural views that I think were unbiblical. And I'm hopeful now, unfortunately, that we're seeing the consequences of some of these really bad decisions. Again, whether it was on gender, whether it's on immigration, I think on abortion, we're going to start seeing these things. Will it allow for a more honest conversation in the church?
Yeah, and I think what that makes me consider, Aaron and David, you brought these stats to the table a lot in the discussions around the SAFE Act and Save Women's Sports Act about what the public opinion was around these issues. It was pretty overwhelmingly against men becoming women and allowing men in women's sports. And you see that overwhelming number in something that's a private question for these surveys, but yet the public discourse is overwhelmingly supporting them. So you know that there's a disconnect there, and hopefully I think what you're saying, Aaron, is where we've seen the change, or where we hope to see the change, is that now we can bring those ideas from the privacy of our own minds and beliefs into the public discourse around these issues, and actually be honest about where the majority of people are on these issues and be able to speak out confidently.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads me to my second, and I think I don't know if you'd have told me that the Supreme Court, that the marquee case of the Supreme Court would be around this gender ideology issue, I don't know if I'd have believed you 5 years ago, but that is the case. So there, back in March of 23, Tennessee passed SB 1, which banned, it would be very similar to our SAFE Act here in the state of Ohio. It banned the use of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone, and surgery for the purpose of changing a child's sex, right? Quotes, air quotes. And so now in December of 2024, the Supreme Court took up that case because it was challenged. They took up that case, and we could hear as soon as June a ruling on the legalities of that bill, and it's looking. I listened to that entire entire hearing, and it everybody I've heard is saying the same thing I felt, that it's looking like we're going to get a favorable ruling in Tennessee, which will impact that issue across about 26 states now across the country. And so, yeah, that's a huge one. I think a lot of us will be having our eyes on.
Yeah. And, Dave, one of the aspects of this, though, that I'm really interested in the new year is, does, I think we're in a really good position, especially even with the Trump administration coming in, to see, the days of the gender clinics I think are really numbered, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot of the folks that are involved in this see that, so like the really big terrible things, I think we're gonna, like the surgeries on kids, I think those are probably done in wide swaths of the country, if not the entire country, right? But and I'm seeing this especially in just sort of day-to-day conversations with, when we get outside our political bubble and touch grass and interact with just friends that aren't living in this day-to-day sort of cultural and political world that we operate in here. I think it would be, I'm concerned that seeing this stuff go on the retreat on the big stuff is going to fool us into thinking that this debate is over. Right. Because, like, it's one of the reasons we talk so much here about institutions, because they're really hard to change, and they sort of have a mass reach that few other things have. And I'm still seeing sort of the woke mindset that created this trans ideology, right? It's really a Marxist mindset. We can debate all that stuff, but that mindset is still very prevalent in academia, in hospitals. All these doctors that either were doing this or were encouraging it, celebrating it, silently consenting to it, they're all still there, right? All of these academics, they're all still there. It's not like all of a sudden there's been a massive wave. And I still, I mean, just recently, I think I've talked about this on the podcast, I've witnessed good, what you would figure would solid Christian folk get consumed by this woke mindset still, right? That are outside of our normal space. And so I think the Skermetti Tennessee lawsuit, I think, is going to be a huge one. And obviously we want to win it. And it will have massive implications. But, there's a piece of this that the core, the root of that, what brought that litigation forward is still out there,
Right.
And we can't let ourselves fall asleep at the wheel on it.
Mike, yeah. I just want to commend you for passing on the marijuana joke there. When he said he wanted to touch grass, I saw on your face where you wanted to take that.
That one was all you, my friend. That is for once.
David's always thinking about weed. That's the thing. Like that, I'm making I'm always thinking about Twitter, which is like that's always the Twitter thing is like, hey, get offline and go touch grass. Every time we're talking about this, David's like, well, why aren't we talking about marijuana?
Well, you work where I work.
I am so glad for our audience that they know some things never change, even in the new year, and that it has fallen to me to once again get us back on track here. Just some things never change. So my next one, but it does kind of tie into what we're talking about with the gender ideology and some of the work we've done around that, is the work that we've done around school planting and just education in general. I'm really excited for the growth in gospel-centered opportunities, education opportunities for kids throughout Ohio. When you look at what the Ohio Christian Education Network has done with the expansion of Ed Choice, and with this number of schools we've got in the pipeline, or churches we've got in the pipeline to start schools with. This is a conversation we're going to have in a couple weeks with Jimmy Scroggins out of the SBC, who's written a book about why churches should be starting schools, and then even consider House Bill 8, which was signed into law this week, that opens up or protects LifeWise. There are just so many more opportunities for kids in Ohio to receive gospel-centered education, and I'm really excited to see what that's going to do. And where this ties into to that point we were just making about the gender ideology is, hopefully it's going to help wrestle them free from that grasp of, even if this is still in public schools, they're going to be getting good, solid, foundational gospel education through LifeWise, or through the ability to go to a school and a church in their community. And I think it's just really exciting for the next generation here in Ohio.
Yeah, I think that excitement goes across, the broad spectrum of folks, and you talk about bipartisanship, and in the body, I'm hearing a lot of folks just excited about the amount of money that they have to be able to send their kids to a decent school. You look at the LifeWise bill, and this just passed, the religious release time instruction bill, the Parents' Bill of Rights has just passed a couple of days ago. You would hear a lot of sermons talking about how they took prayer out of school. We just passed a bill that basically says that all school districts have to abide by the law of Ohio, our Constitution, that says it is a parental right and it is a religious freedom for parents to be able to allow their children to participate in religious instruction off of school campus. And right now we're reaching about 30,000 kids, and we could see by the end of 2025, we could see 60,000 kids receiving the gospel of Jesus Christ during school hours, right? And so there should really not be a whole lot of any more complaining about, how they took prayer out of schools, separation of church and state. Guys, the body of Christ is moving forward, moving beyond. And so one of the things I'm watching is how many of our churches are going to step up and say, hey, let's start a school in the building while our building's closed most of the week. Let's start a school and educate kids, not just, for Christ, but just give them an education. Let's allow our kids in our community the benefit of being able to read by fourth grade, and do basic math. And let's start a LifeWise program. Let's sponsor a LifeWise program. If you have a church that's near a school, hey, for an hour a week, let these kids over there and let them get some biblical instruction. But there's so many things that we can do proactively that will not just bless the kids in our building, but bless our cities.
Yeah. No, I mean, to me, that's again a part of this sort of broader rejection of the status quo, right? And again, how much does this come to David's point? How much does this come into the church, right? And we've had a model for doing church for all of our lives, certainly, and I think what we're seeing is the way we've done things isn't producing the results we want, right? And isn't producing a more thriving sort of culture, society, things like that. And so the church stepping back into what has sort of been its traditional role in America, especially, of not just discipling into Christ, but educating, right? And really seeing those two things as being together. And so, yeah, with everything from LifeWise to, schools and churches like we're doing, I mean, I think next year we've started 2 schools so far in churches at CCV, and I think next year we're going to start at least 8 in fall of 25. Could be more. like that is that's momentum and a sign of churches sort of awakening to the real problems we're facing today.
And Aaron, I'm gonna jump in and go back to back here with mine because that actually ties perfectly into my next and final point. It's that I'm really excited to see how churches respond to our Hope in a Future report that we're going to release. And yeah, I know it's been 2.5 years since we sat down and you interviewed me about coming on board here at CCV. But when you ask me what are the things that motivate me, I care about families and I care about kids. And as I've watched us put this report together with the help of Brad Wilcox and his group at the Institute of Family Studies, to see the direct line between this undermining of family formation and all of the damage that it causes and all of the ways that it's tied to the many issues that we see in society, this feels to me like a sweet spot for the church in Ohio to get engaged in these issues and to really make one of those generational differences if they come on board and start talking about this in biblical ways and to really lift up God's institution of the family to make it better for moms and dads and kids. I think it's going to be a very well received report, and I hope that the excitement that I'm feeling personally is something that spreads to all of our churches in Ohio, and that this really makes a difference in our state.
Yeah, that actually was my third one as well, Mike. And it's probably not just because you and I are having our eyeballs fall out going through the draft of the report and reading citations and all that stuff. But it is, you know, to me, and it all kind of ties back, you know, and this wasn't intentional, but I think all three of my points on sort of the three things I'm looking forward to this year, um, it all comes back to that sort of what I'm sensing and what I'm praying is a vibe shift in the country, because you know this is the adult conversation that we've needed to have in America. Um, you know, it is we spend so much time um, when we're talking about what the challenges are in the country. We spend so much time talking about different symptoms, different things that are wrong, right? Um, and very little time talking about what the actual root cause is. And that's I think that's because of a few different reasons. One, you know, we have to be honest that there are sort of leftist Marxist forces in the country that believe family is evil, right? Again, you go back and you read what used to be on the BLM website and some of what sort of modern Marxists talk about of the destruction of the nuclear family. They very much believe that, but that's a portion of what's happening, and that's an influential portion because it's in academia and some of these sort of large media forces. But I think for a lot of folks, they've just the problem of what's happening to families is so hard to fix, right? It can't be fixed with just, you know, um, if academic outcomes are falling behind, well, you know it's fairly easy to do. Throw more money at it, right? Let's just send more money to public schools. That's an easier fix than saying, well, why is this happening? And you go talk to every teacher, and they will tell you if the kid doesn't have a stable home, if they don't have a mom and a dad at home, they're going to likely struggle much more in school. They're going to likely get in more trouble at school. Every teacher will tell you that. I mean, David spent more time in these schools than all of us. Um, you know, that adult conversation, can we actually engage in this in a way that leads to real change and leads to real both leads to public policies, but also our churches. I mean, this is probably the thing as I'm going through this report and seeing what's, you know, the failings of the family in America today and in Ohio in particular, and how much suffering has resulted from kids not having married moms and dads at home. Um, the thing I'm most concerned about, and I think the hardest part about what we're going to be bringing forward is, can we get our churches to start reshaping the cultural imagination of our congregants, of our sheep, of what the good life is, right? And it's not some materialistic pursuit of career, right? It's not. It is, worshiping your God with your family, right? Being married and having kids is an incredible blessing and honor and goal, and should be a goal in life, right? You guys heard me say this all the time. The Mormons do this way better than Christians do at this point, which is a shame to us, right? They celebrate and instill in their next generation that being married and having kids is beautiful and good. And yes, it's hard, but that's what makes it beautiful and good, and makes for a fulfilled life. That aspect of it, I feel like is so important. And if we don't get that right, then we won't be able to accomplish what we're hoping to here.
David, anything to add on that as somebody who's seen this in the schools, and you've also got that perspective of the church side too in your work as a pastor and minister. So what are you sensing around hope in the future as we head into this report?
No, I'm excited personally, but I do share Aaron's concern. It kind of goes back to what he said about how will they see our witness, right? And you can look at it a couple of ways. How will God look at my witness, right? Or how will culture and cultural Christians or culturally driven pastors, how will they look at our witness? And so when we start talking about the difference between two-parent homes and single-parent homes, will pastors shy away from that important discussion, all important discussion, because of how they may be looked at upon by cultural media, cultural institutions, culturally minded young people who are coming through universities, liberal universities. This is going to be a challenge, and I know it sounds crazy for folks that deal with really hyper controversial topics, like gender confusion and things like that, to now say, wow, just talking about marriage and family according to the book can be almost just as much controversial in the body as some of those other issues, and so it's going to be a big weight to have to push uphill. But I think it's even more important than some of the things we dealt with in the last General Assembly.
All right. Well, you get to bring us home, Mr. Mahan. So what's your third topic that you're looking out for in 2025?
Well, as excited as I am to see the state house here in Ohio, how will that operate as a supermajority? I'm kind of interested in seeing how will the nation operate when you have a supermajority, right? You've got a president who got the popular vote. You've got a president who's got support from the House and the Senate. And for me, it's all eyes on Israel, right? Will the Teflon Don, who said, listen, if those terrorists do not release the hostages, they'll be held to pay. I want to see what will the impact of a true world power, the positive impact, have on the global scale, on the global stage. How will this affect Israel? How will this superpower affect the war in Ukraine and Russia? Will they line up like everybody's expecting Trump for them? He's saying they're going to line up. So I have seen already, and I think all of us have, some positive moves just from when he won the election. I mean, there's already some positive shifts going on there. And, and so I would like to say that before January 20th or soon after, we'll see every last one of the remaining hostages released. We'll see Iran, kind of pull the support from some of their proxies in the area, and just kind of, throw them under the bus, like I kind of, you kind of see that, happening already. But yeah, it's all eyes on Israel for me on the international scale.
Yeah, I think that's, I think in a lot of ways, Dave, and it's really hard to, whenever talking about things like Israel or just sort of global wars in general, it's hard not to slip into hyperbole, right? And I always say, in many ways, having something called World War I, having something called World War II, almost implies that at some point there will be a World War III, right? Like that's the way that those types of things go generally, right? And so everyone's sort of sitting on ready for it. And so I always want to be careful not to fall into exaggeration, but certainly what happened in Israel on October 7th was different than what we normally see, right? And what's happening in Russia and Ukraine is very different than sort of normal skirmishes that we see going on. And obviously with the massive rise of technology and the ability for remote wars to be fought are very different. And so I think there was very real reason for people to be concerned that we were falling into another massive war. And having the Trump administration come in that brings clarity to the issue is in terms of what's going to impact our day-to-day lives, being in another war would be maybe one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
And so to your point, bringing stability to that and stability through saying we're not messing around with this anymore is massive, and is something that Lord willing brings peace. Like every you read, even in the Bible, but everybody who's lived through wars will paint such a depressing and awful picture of what it's like. And so and the reason why God tells us time and time again to pray for peace is because the actual suffering through wars is awful. So yeah, I think that's spot on.
Yeah, and we do have a conversation lined up with Michael Mastretta, who we had on shortly after October 7th a couple of years ago. We'll be talking to him in a couple of weeks to get an update about what's going on in the region and what the Trump election means and all those kind of things. So good job, fellas, of tying in a lot of guests and topics that we've already got lined up for the next month or so.
Unintentional. We just got good stuff coming up.
Imagine that. It's like we've got our pulse on what's going on in the world. So, well, this has been fun. As we were talking here, we thought it was going to be maybe a quick overview. This turned into a deeper dive and a pretty thorough overview of stuff that's coming up in 2025. So we'll continue to have a lot to talk about here in the new year, and looking forward to having you guys along again and bringing great stuff, great content, great perspective to our audience here on The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.